My name is Gemma William, and I am 30 years old. 4 days ago, my younger sister sent me a text message that was designed to trap me. She told me our family had booked the exclusive Azure Tower rooftop for my 30th birthday party. 150 guests, top-tier caviar service, a premium open bar pouring vintage champagne over the Las Vegas skyline. It sounded like a dream. It sounded like the kind of celebration a daughter should be deeply grateful for. But I knew my family. I knew the hollow reality hiding behind their designer clothes and country club smiles. I picked up my office phone and called the venue directly. I discovered my parents had forged my corporate signature to secure an $18,000 VIP package. They expected me to show up and pose for my sister and her influencer live streams. They expected me to quietly pay the heavy bill at the end of the night. They banked on my lifelong habit of keeping the peace. They assumed I would gladly swallow the cost rather than cause a public scene in front of their wealthy peers. For years, they had treated me as their invisible bank account. They demanded I fund their superficial lifestyle under the guise of family loyalty. This party was not a gift. It was their grandest theft yet. But I did not argue. I did not call them in tears. I did not cancel the reservation to save them from themselves. As a senior casino cryptographic security lead, I spend my days auditing hotel billing databases, securing digital firewalls, and catching high-level corporate fraud. I simply opened my laptop, accessed the hospitality backend, and rerouted the legal liability directly to their fragile, debt-ridden LLC. When the general manager finally handed them the folio on Saturday night, surrounded by security guards and their horrified elite friends, the resulting fallout was cinematic. They learned exactly what happens when you try to scam a risk management director. Before I continue, if you are curious about how this story ends, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Morning Revenge. Drop a comment letting me know your age and where you are listening from today. Now let me take you back to where this toxic dynamic truly began. Growing up in the neon-lit, high-stakes environment of Las Vegas, Nevada, you learn early on that appearances are a currency. My parents, Richard and Valerie, treated social climbing like a competitive sport. They leased European luxury cars they could not afford. They maintained exclusive country club memberships on revolving credit lines. Hosting lavish, over-the-top parties at strip resorts with panoramic views of the city was their primary symbol of social status. It is a world where projecting an image of glamour is far more important than actual financial stability. They heavily favored my younger sister, Tiffany. She was 24, an aspiring lifestyle influencer who inherited their obsession with status. Tiffany had my mother and her practiced camera smile. She had my father and his ruthless vanity. She spent her days unboxing promotional packages and staging elaborate photo shoots at expensive restaurants. She frequently dismissed my career in tech as boring office work. She saw no value in quiet labor. I am a risk management director for a major strip resort group. My highly specialized career involves corporate risk, digital security, and hotel billing databases. I make a lucrative salary working in the quiet shadows of the casino industry. Because of that steady income, my family established an unspoken, abusive expectation. I was required to fund their expensive tastes. If Tiffany wanted a designer handbag for her social media feed, my mother would lecture me about supporting my sister. If my father needed to cover a delinquent golf club fee, he would corner me at dinner. Whenever I refused, I was branded selfish and ungrateful. I learned very quickly that family unity was just their code word for my wallet. The text message arrived at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. It vibrated against the mahogany surface of my desk at corporate headquarters. The screen lit up with Tiffany and her name. "Surprise! We booked the Azure rooftop for your birthday. Everyone is coming." I stared at the bright screen. For a fleeting second, a naive part of me hoped they were genuinely celebrating my milestone. Turning 30 is significant. A small part of me still craved my parents and their authentic affection. But 2 decades of being the family financial scapegoat warned me otherwise. I picked up my phone and replied with a simple, "Thank you." Then I began my audit. I picked up my office phone and dialed the Azure Tower private event line. Leveraging my authority in the casino network, I bypassed the standard hostesses. I transferred myself directly to the billing director. I asked to verify the contract details for the William event scheduled for Saturday night. The director pulled up the digital file and confirmed my suspicion. Richard and Valerie had booked the VIP package. This included premium bottle service, imported floral arrangements, and a cordoned-off cabana section. The detail that made my blood run cold was sitting at the bottom of the digital manifest. Listed as the financial guarantor was my corporate profile. They had forged my electronic authorization to secure the venue. My pulse remained at a steady 60 beats per minute. When you deal with corporate risk management daily, panic is just useless data. My family had mistaken my lifelong silence for compliance. They assumed I would shrink away from conflict. I calmly instructed the billing coordinator to void my profile from their system. I cited strict internal fraud protocols. This move legally bound the invoice solely to the names on the original contract, Richard and Valerie William. I spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon establishing digital firewalls on my personal bank accounts. I ensured no familial overrides could bypass my banking security. Every credit card I owned was flagged for strict, in-person PIN verification. By hospitality law, whoever signs the final event manifest is liable for the charges, regardless of verbal agreements. I knew exactly what they were planning. They wanted to ambush me with the check in front of 150 guests. They planned to weaponize social pressure to force my signature on a blank authorization form. They expected to win. But reading data like the Matrix made me the most dangerous person in their fabricated world. The trap was set. The liability was locked. The house was about to win. I closed my laptop and watched the Las Vegas skyline through my office window. The neon lights were just turning on. My parents had spent my entire life building an illusion. I was going to let them enjoy their fake wealth for a few more days. I was going to let them wear their leased clothes and drink their expensive champagne. And then I was going to hand them the bill. The encrypted monitors in the risk management department hummed with a steady clinical precision. Gemma Williams sat at her mahogany desk, surrounded by the sterile environment she preferred. Her world was dictated by logic algorithms and data security. Then her personal cell phone vibrated against the polished wood. The screen lit up, displaying a new message. It was a text from her younger sister, Tiffany. "Surprise! We booked the Azura rooftop for your 30th birthday. Everyone is coming." Gemma stared at the glowing letters. She did not smile. She did not feel the sudden rush of joy that a celebrated sibling should experience. Instead, she felt the immediate, sharp suspicion of an auditor detecting a critical anomaly. To understand her cold reaction, one must examine the toxic ecosystem her family inhabited. They lived deep within the Vegas vanity subculture. In Las Vegas, appearances serve as the primary currency. Her parents, Richard and Valerie, treated social climbing as a competitive blood sport. They operated on a dangerous cocktail of relentless ambition and revolving credit. Every interaction was a meticulously staged performance designed for an audience of country club peers they desperately wanted to impress. They leased a sleek European sports car they kept parked in the driveway of a heavily mortgaged suburban home. They purchased designer golf clubs on high-interest credit while quietly dodging their utility bills. Tiffany was their golden child. At 24, she spent her days curating an artificial life for social media. She staged elaborate photo shoots in luxury hotel lobbies she could not afford to sleep in. She unboxed promotional makeup samples and loudly proclaimed herself a brand ambassador. To Tiffany and her parents, the career Gemma built as a senior casino cryptographic security lead was invisible. They openly mocked her profession, calling it boring back-office labor. They had no interest in the sophisticated security systems she designed or the lucrative corporate assets she protected on a daily basis. They only cared about the steady, reliable income that hit her bank account every 2 weeks. Because Gemma possessed the only legitimate salary in the family, she was their designated financial utility. This abusive dynamic was established through years of subtle manipulation. If the family attended a dinner at a renowned celebrity chef restaurant on the Strip, Richard would loudly order the most expensive steak and the rarest wine for the table. When the leather-bound check inevitably arrived, he would suddenly remember he left his wallet in the valet. He would pat his pockets and look at Gemma with a strained, expectant smile. If she hesitated, Valerie would lean across the table and whisper harsh words about family loyalty. They weaponized guilt to fund their luxury. Knowing this history, the idea of them generously funding a lavish VIP rooftop party was mathematically impossible. They did not possess the financial liquidity to buy out a cabana at a neighborhood pool, let alone secure the exclusive Azure Tower. Gemma picked up her desk phone. She bypassed the standard guest services line and dialed the direct internal extension for the Azure Tower Private Events Billing Department. A woman named Sarah answered the line. Gemma used her corporate identification number to verify her industry credentials. She requested the billing manifest for the William event scheduled for Saturday evening. She listened to the rhythmic clicking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. The seconds ticked by in heavy silence. Sarah finally read the details aloud. 150 guests, top-tier caviar service, a premium open bar pouring vintage champagne, a cordoned-off VIP section overlooking the neon skyline. The estimated total hovered near $18,000. Then came the final, devastating detail. Sarah confirmed the financial guarantor on file. It was Gemma and her corporate profile. Richard and Valerie had forged her electronic authorization to secure the venue. They bypassed the initial deposit requirement by linking the reservation directly to her high-limit corporate account. A cold clarity washed over Gemma. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand to speak to a manager to yell about the injustice. In her profession, uncontrolled emotion was a liability. She processed the theft exactly as she would a corporate data breach. Her parents expected her to show up on Saturday night, surrounded by their elite friends, and quietly accept the financial burden. They assumed the social pressure of 150 watching eyes would force her to sign the final receipt. They were betting their entire reputation on her lifelong habit of keeping the peace. Gemma instructed Sarah to immediately void her corporate profile from the event manifest. She cited a strict internal security protocol regarding unauthorized electronic signatures. Sarah complied without question, removing Gemma from the financial liability. This swift, tactical action legally bound the invoice solely to the names listed on the original reservation contract. Richard and Valerie William operating under their fragile country club holding company. But as the profile was voided, Sarah mentioned a newly updated venue policy. The Azure Tower required a physical credit card to be placed on file at the hostess stand 48 hours prior to the event. The electronic profile was only a placeholder. Richard would have to present a physical card to keep the reservation active. Gemma thanked Sarah and disconnected the line. She leaned back in her leather chair. Her mind raced through the logistical possibilities. Richard knew he did not have a personal card with an $18,000 limit. He knew Valerie exhausted her credit line months ago, buying designer luggage for a weekend trip. How were they planning to satisfy the physical card requirement without triggering an immediate decline? The realization struck her like a physical blow. She unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk and reached for her personal mail stack. A chill ran down her spine. A replacement corporate card she had requested 3 weeks ago was missing from the pile. She had assumed it was simply delayed in the postal system. Now she knew exactly where it was. The situation escalated from a manipulative family dinner to a calculated felony. Her father had stolen her mail. The electronic forgery was just the first layer of the deception. The true trap involved presenting her stolen physical card to the hostess on the night of the party. If they succeeded, the $18,000 debt would permanently attach to her name, ruining her flawless credit and jeopardizing her security clearance at the casino. Gemma stared at the empty space in her drawer. The faint hope she had harbored for a genuine familial connection evaporated. It was replaced by a clinical, calculated resolve. She would not call them to cancel the party. She would let them walk into the venue. She would let them order the champagne and perform for their audience. Then she would execute a flawless financial audit. The empty space in the bottom drawer of my desk held my gaze for a long time. The stolen corporate card was the missing piece of their puzzle. I pictured my father standing in my kitchen 2 weeks ago. He had stopped by unannounced, claiming he wanted to check on my air conditioning unit. He had offered me a warm smile while secretly slipping the heavy envelope from my mail stack into his tailored jacket pocket. The sheer violation of that memory did not make me want to scream. It made the air in my lungs turn freezing cold. To understand why this specific betrayal was my breaking point, you have to understand the events of my 25th birthday. 5 years ago, I was not a director. I was an entry-level data analyst working graveyard shifts in a windowless server room. I drove a reliable used sedan and lived in a modest apartment miles away from the neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip. I saved every spare dollar I earned. I denied myself vacations and new clothes to build a down payment for a small townhouse. I possessed $38,000 in a high-yield savings account. It was the physical manifestation of my independence and my grueling labor. My parents knew about the account. They always possessed a predatory instinct for locating money. On the evening of my 25th birthday, there was no surprise party. There was no cake or celebration. Instead, my mother called me in a state of hyperventilating panic. She demanded I meet them at a bleak 24-hour diner on the industrial outskirts of the city, far removed from the country club peers they worked so hard to impress. When I slid into the cracked vinyl booth, Richard looked haunted. His usual arrogant posture had collapsed. The polished veneer of the wealthy patriarch was entirely stripped away. He confessed to a catastrophic financial error. He had engaged with an offshore sports betting syndicate. He placed a desperate, reckless wager on a collegiate championship game, hoping to double his money and pay off a secret second mortgage. The wager failed. The people he owed were not standard debt collectors. They were relentless men who threatened to seize the family home and publicly humiliate them. The social shame of losing their house would destroy their standing in the Vegas vanity subculture. But the legal and physical threats were far more pressing. Valerie wept openly into a thin paper napkin. She reached across the sticky diner table and gripped my wrists. She weaponized my empathy with practiced precision. She invoked the concept of family duty. She told me blood requires sacrifice. She insisted that if I did not save them, the family would be ruined forever. I was young and still desperate for their approval. Through silent tears, I opened my mobile banking application right there in the diner booth. My hands shook as I typed in the routing numbers. I initiated a wire transfer for $38,000. I watched the digital balance drop to zero. 4 years of double shifts, skipped meals, and relentless discipline vanished into the digital ether to erase my father and his gambling debt. The moment the confirmation screen appeared, the atmosphere in the booth shifted. The terrifying panic evaporated from Richard and his face. He let out a long sigh of relief, leaned back against the vinyl seat, and flagged down a waitress. He did not offer a profound apology. He did not promise to pay me back. He simply ordered a steak and eggs breakfast and complained that the diner coffee tasted like burnt dirt. I sat in silence, mourning the death of my future, while my parents resumed their ordinary lives. The true severity of the financial abuse became clear exactly 1 week later. I was eating instant noodles in my apartment when I saw Tiffany post a new photo on her social media feed. She was posing at a luxury resort pool. Sitting on the lounge chair next to her was Valerie, holding a brand new designer tote bag that retailed for $3,000. They claimed they had no money to save their own home. They forced me to drain my life savings for their survival. Yet they magically found the discretionary funds to purchase imported leather goods to maintain their wealthy illusion. That was the exact moment the naive, compliant daughter ceased to exist. In her place, a ruthless corporate auditor was born. I stopped attending their Sunday dinners. I poured my resulting anger into my career. I studied cryptography, risk matrices, and corporate hospitality law. I learned how casinos identify and trap financial predators. I built impenetrable digital armor around my life. I climbed the corporate ladder with relentless focus until I became the director of risk management. I vowed I would never allow anyone to render me financially vulnerable again. Now, 5 years later, I sat in my executive office staring at the Azure Tower billing manifest. The trauma of my 25th birthday ignited a calculated, unyielding rage. They had not learned a single lesson. They still viewed me as an expendable, quiet shadow whose only purpose was to finance their spotlight. But this time, they were not begging for survival. They were forging my signature to buy vintage champagne and top-tier caviar for a room full of superficial socialites. They were committing identity theft to fund a party they would use to mock my boring career. I made a definitive choice. I would not call them to cancel the reservation. If I canceled the event, they would spin a false narrative to their friends, claiming I was a jealous, cruel daughter who ruined a beautiful gesture. They would play the victims. I needed them to expose themselves on their own stage. I decided I would attend the gathering. I would wear a polite smile. I would play the compliant daughter one final time and let them hang themselves with their own monumental hubris. The stakes for this operation were incredibly high. My plan required surgical precision. If I failed to secure my assets properly, I would be legally on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars. The venue would enforce the contract, and I would be dragged right back into my family and their endless cycle of debt. I had to neutralize the stolen physical card without tipping off my father. If I simply reported the black card as stolen, the bank would immediately cancel it. When Richard attempted to present the canceled card to the Azure Tower hostess on Thursday for the mandatory pre-authorization hold, the terminal would flash a bright red decline. Richard would panic, realize the scam was up, and cancel the party before the trap could snap shut. To execute the perfect audit, the stolen card needed to swipe successfully at the hostess stand. It needed to generate an approval code to give Richard a false sense of supreme confidence. But the back-end coding of that approval needed to hold zero financial liability for my accounts. I had to initiate a specialized banking maneuver known as a shadow hold. A shadow hold allows a merchant to verify the validity of an account without actually securing the funds. When the final bill is processed, the charge bypasses the card and defaults to the secondary guarantor listed on the venue contract. In this case, the secondary guarantor was Richard and his holding company. Setting up a shadow hold on a corporate account is an extreme measure. It requires bypassing standard consumer protections and writing a custom rule in the banking firewall. As I logged into the high-security financial portal, my office phone rang. It was an internal call from the corporate fraud division. Altering the authorization rules on my own high-limit card had just triggered a red flag in the system. The chief compliance officer was on the line, demanding to know why I was manipulating my own security profile. If I could not convince him to look the other way, he would lock my accounts, terminate my employment, and the entire trap would disintegrate before Saturday night. The blinking red light on my desk phone demanded immediate attention. Marcus, the chief compliance officer for our resort group, was waiting on the other end of the line. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. If Marcus discovered my personal connection to the financial anomaly triggering his system alerts, he would freeze my accounts pending a full internal investigation. That security protocol would instantly alert my father. The $18,000 trap would dissolve before Saturday night. I picked up the receiver and maintained a perfectly flat, professional tone. I greeted Marcus and anticipated his rapid-fire questions. He wanted to know why the director of risk management was manipulating authorization firewalls on her own corporate profile. He cited 3 different compliance violations. I let him finish his lecture before delivering a fabricated but highly plausible explanation. I told Marcus I was conducting a live penetration test on the Azure Tower point-of-sale architecture. I explained that a recent software patch presented potential vulnerabilities regarding secondary guarantor liability. I needed to run a ghost account through their live system to ensure the payment gateways were routing rejected charges correctly. Marcus paused. He respected my technical expertise and knew my department frequently stress-tested the casino networks. He bought the explanation entirely. He cleared the system alerts and granted me 48 hours of unrestricted administrative access to complete my simulated audit. When the line went dead, I exhaled a slow, measured breath. The final obstacle preventing my retaliation had just been removed. My corporate role required me to view the hospitality industry through a strict matrix of data liability and user authentication. I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors. I needed to construct the most sophisticated cryptographic trap of my career. I audited the Azure Tower back-end systems, mapping the exact route my father took to establish the reservation. The digital footprint revealed a terrifying, critical detail. Richard had not merely forged an electronic signature on a PDF document. The system logs showed he had physically presented a high-limit corporate black card to the venue hostess earlier that morning. The name embossed on that plastic was mine. 3 weeks prior, I had requested a replacement card from my banking institution. The envelope never arrived in my mailbox. I had assumed the Postal Service misplaced it. Now looking at the timestamps on the Azure Tower terminal, I knew the truth. My father had stood in my kitchen, smiled at my face, and casually stolen my mail. That stolen plastic was the ultimate instrument of his downfall. It was the crucial piece of evidence that escalated his actions from a manipulative family dinner into a documented felony. If I simply flagged the card as stolen, the bank would immediately terminate the account number. When the venue attempted to run a pre-authorization check, the terminal would flash a bright red decline notification. Richard would panic. He would invent a sudden excuse to cancel the party, protecting his fragile social standing while avoiding the financial consequences. I could not allow him to escape. Instead, I instituted a shadow hold. A shadow hold is a specialized digital quarantine used by fraud investigators to track stolen assets without tipping off the thief. I programmed the Azure Tower Payment Gateway to recognize the black card as a valid open account. To the hostess swiping the magnetic strip, the terminal would display a standard green approval checkmark. It would look exactly like an open, pre-authorized tab backed by a wealthy corporate executive. However, I altered the foundational routing code attached to that specific approval. I severed the digital link between the venue terminal and my actual bank vault. The card was now a ghost. It possessed the illusion of unlimited funds, but carried zero financial weight. When the party concluded and the venue attempted to settle the final balance, the system would reject the ghost card and automatically trigger a default liability clause. In corporate hospitality law, a defaulted payment instantly reverts to the primary signatories listed on the original event manifest. I accessed the foundational contract Richard had signed to secure the rooftop. He had listed his holding company as the primary booking entity. Richard and Valerie operated a shell corporation they called William Enterprises. They used this LLC to write off expensive country club dinners and luxury car leases as fabricated business expenses. It was a flimsy legal shield they used to hide their mounting personal debt from government auditors. I mapped the billing software to bypass my ghost profile and permanently anchor the $18,000 debt directly to William Enterprises. The financial trap was fully armed. They were about to rack up staggering charges on a phantom account. They were legally binding themselves to every single penny they spent on caviar and vintage champagne. The house was primed to win. I spent Thursday and Friday operating in a state of icy detachment. I monitored the system logs as the venue finalized the catering orders and arranged the imported floral centerpieces. My parents were blindly walking into a financial slaughterhouse, and I felt no remorse. I packed away the naive, compliant daughter and embraced the ruthless architect I had become. Saturday night arrived wrapped in neon glamour and synthetic desert heat. I drove my modest sedan to the Azure Tower valet, tossing the keys to a familiar attendant. I bypassed the crowded casino floor, navigating the labyrinth of slot machines and high-stakes baccarat tables. The sensory overload of Las Vegas usually faded into the background for me, But tonight, every flashing light felt like a spotlight on the impending execution. I stepped into the exclusive glass elevator designated for the rooftop lounge. As the capsule ascended, the sprawling, glittering grid of the Strip revealed itself. I wore a sleek, understated black dress. My jewelry was minimal. I carried a simple leather clutch that held my encrypted tablet. I did not dress to impress their wealthy friends. I dressed for a corporate audit. The elevator doors parted, releasing a wave of thumping bass and the rich scent of premium cigars. I stepped onto the azure rooftop. The panoramic view was breathtaking, but the crowd was suffocating. 150 members of the Vegas vanity subculture packed the deck. These were local socialites, minor celebrities, and country club elites who traded in rumors and superficial wealth. A thick, heavy velvet rope separated the main thoroughfare from the exclusive VIP cabanas. That rope was a powerful symbol. My parents needed that physical barrier to prove they were superior to the ordinary tourists below. I spotted Richard and Valerie immediately. They were holding court in the center of the largest cabana, projecting immense fake prosperity. Valerie wore a diamond necklace I knew she could not afford. Richard laughed loudly, holding a fresh cocktail. They looked invincible. They looked like royalty. I took a slow sip of sparkling water from a passing waiter tray. The dramatic irony was intoxicating. I was the only person on the rooftop who knew the velvet rope protecting them was actually the perimeter of a financial prison. Before I could blend into the background, the next conflict found me. A bright camera flash temporarily blinded my vision. My younger sister Tiffany materialized from the crowd, holding her phone high in the air. She was actively live streaming to thousands of strangers. She grabbed my arm with forceful, fake enthusiasm, dragging me toward the VIP section, where a group of her influencer friends waited. She shoved a leather-bound cocktail menu into my chest. She demanded I hand over my credit card to buy her friends a $3,000 bottle of reserve liquor. She smiled for the camera while delivering a vicious, whispered threat, instructing me not to embarrass the family. Tiffany kept her phone elevated, capturing the perfect angle for her digital followers. Her audience watched a beautiful, supportive sister hosting a lavish birthday gathering. They could not hear the venom in her hushed tone. She shoved the heavy leather-bound beverage menu against my ribs. Her manicured acrylic nails dug sharply into my forearm. She insisted her influencer friends expected premium service. She demanded my stolen plastic fund a $3,000 vintage reserve. The thick red braided cord of the velvet rope swung gently behind her. That rope, suspended between polished brass stanchions, served as a physical manifestation of my family and their desperate vanity. To Richard and Valerie, it represented supreme social triumph. It was a barrier designed to keep the ordinary casino tourists away from their elite, fragile illusion. They needed that physical separation to feel superior to the rest of the world. But standing inside the VIP cabana, observing their reckless arrogance, I saw the velvet rope for what it truly was. It was a perimeter. It was the boundary of a financial prison they had built for themselves. I did not flinch at the sharp pressure of my sister and her nails. In the corporate risk department, you learn to neutralize hostile negotiations by removing the emotional variable. I offered Tiffany a serene, practiced smile. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. I turned toward a passing waiter who carried a silver tray of empty flutes. I caught his attention with a subtle nod. "The hostess would like to add a bottle of your finest vintage reserve to her tab," I instructed the waiter smoothly. "Please ensure it is charged directly to the primary manifest under William Enterprises." The waiter offered a professional bow and walked away to fulfill the order. Tiffany stood frozen. Her jaw tightened so intensely the muscles in her neck strained against her heavy contour makeup. She could not scream or throw a tantrum because her phone was still actively broadcasting to 3,000 viewers. She was trapped by her own curated aesthetic. She forced a rigid, hollow grin for the camera, laughing off the interaction before abruptly ending the live feed. Before Tiffany could unleash a private verbal assault, Valerie materialized from the crowd. My mother glided across the deck wearing a sequined gown I knew she planned to return on Monday morning with the retail tags carefully tucked inside the lining. She radiated the heavy scent of an expensive imported perfume. She threw her arms around my neck, pulling me into a suffocating, performative embrace. Valerie did not look at me during the hug. Her eyes darted over my shoulders, scanning the VIP section to ensure the local politicians and real estate developers were watching her display of maternal affection. She spoke at a volume designed for public consumption. She proudly announced to the surrounding guests how much she loved her hard-working corporate girl. She claimed this magnificent evening was merely a small token of their endless parental devotion. I stood perfectly still, accepting the hollow praises. The dramatic irony tasted sharp and intoxicating. I was the only person breathing the desert air who knew the truth. They were not benefactors. They were thieves standing in the center of a crime scene they had proudly decorated themselves. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. I scanned the terrace, calculating the accumulating liabilities. The ice sculptures were melting into crystal basins. The caviar stations were being rapidly depleted by guests who felt zero obligation to the hosts. The tab was accelerating faster than even I had projected. Tiffany retreated to the far corner of the cabana to regroup with Richard. She leaned close to his ear, her face flushed with genuine panic. She pulled out her phone to show him the blank screen. What she did not realize in her haste was that her streaming application had glitched. The video feed had terminated, but the audio microphone remained active, linking directly to her public profile page. I casually retrieved my encrypted tablet from my clutch, pretending to review a work email. I tapped a hidden shortcut, opening a secure browser and accessing my sister and her public social media channel. I inserted a discreet wireless earpiece, hiding the device beneath my hair. The ambient noise of the thumping club music faded as I isolated the audio feed from her microphone. The conversation I intercepted extinguished any lingering shred of familial guilt residing in my chest. Tiffany was not complaining about the champagne. Her voice trembled as she interrogated our father. She asked Richard if the Azure Tower hostess had successfully swiped my physical plastic yet. She demanded to know if the electronic forgery was holding up against the casino security systems. Richard laughed, a deep, arrogant sound. He assured her the stolen card was locked in the venue's safe, generating a flawless open tab. He patted her shoulder and promised her the quiet, boring sister would be paying for their luxury for the next 5 years. The plot twist hit me with the force of a physical strike. Tiffany was not an innocent bystander corrupted by our parents. She was an active, willing participant in the felony. She knew Richard had stolen my mail. She helped orchestrate the identity theft. The betrayal was unanimous. My entire bloodline had conspired to ruin my financial future simply to fund one night of superficial glory. I removed the earpiece. The cold, calculating architecture of my mind locked into its final configuration. They were no longer my family. They were hostile liabilities. They were predators who had wandered blindly into a snare. I watched Richard flag down another server to order a fresh round of imported cigars for a group of minor celebrities. He puffed his chest out, pointing grandly at the Las Vegas skyline, acting as though he owned the city. He was intoxicated by the illusion of his own power. He had no idea the shadow hold on his account was ticking down like a silent detonator. The atmosphere on the deck grew louder, more chaotic. The elite guests consumed the luxury with ravenous entitlement. I stood near the edge of the glass railing, feeling the warm wind sweep across the neon grid below. The bill was crossing the $15,000 threshold. The confrontation was drawing near. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shift in the crowd. The sea of sequined dresses and tailored suits parted near the private elevators. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a pristine charcoal suit stepped onto the terrace. It was Victor, the general manager of the Azure Tower. His expression was devoid of the usual hospitality warmth. His jaw was set with grim, professional determination. Victor did not mingle. He bypassed the ordinary patrons and walked in a straight, deliberate line toward the velvet rope guarding our VIP section. He scanned the crowd until his eyes locked onto mine. A silent communication passed between us. The hospitality industry operates on a strict code of risk management. Victor understood the parameters of the cryptographic trap I had constructed. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket and stepped over the red braided cord. The final act of the audit was about to begin. The house was preparing to collect its debt. The initial hour on the Azure rooftop unfolded exactly as I predicted. The gathering devolved into a chaotic display of competitive vanity. My parents circulated through the enclosed pavilion, greeting local politicians and minor celebrities with practiced charm. They acted like royalty, holding court in a neon-lit kingdom. I remained near the edge of the terrace, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I watched the financial liabilities multiply with every passing minute. Waiters carried silver trays loaded with imported oysters and rare spirits. The tab grew heavier. Then the first direct conflict of the evening ignited. My younger sister hunted me down. Tiffany navigated through the dense crowd of socialites, wearing a custom silk gown she could not afford. She held her smartphone high above her head, capturing the glittering skyline for her digital audience. She dragged 3 of her fellow internet personalities behind her. They were a flock of entitled 20-somethings desperate for luxury content. Tiffany spotted me standing by the glass railing. She rushed forward with forceful, artificial enthusiasm. She hooked her arm through mine, pulling me tightly against her side. She aimed the camera lens directly at our faces. Her smile was blinding and entirely fake. She shouted over the thumping bass, praising her amazing older sister. She narrated a fabricated story for her viewers, claiming I was having the time of my life at the beautiful party she designed. I offered a polite, calibrated smile for the lens. In my profession, dealing with hostile actors requires maintaining a neutral baseline. I did not pull away. I let her capture the footage she needed to maintain her wealthy aesthetic online. I knew her digital followers were the only currency she truly valued. The moment her thumb tapped the screen to end the recording, the illusion shattered. Her bright smile vanished instantly. The warmth in her eyes turned into hard, calculating ice. She dropped her arm from my shoulder and stepped back. She turned to her friends, instructing them to wait near the plush seating area. Once we were isolated, she reached into her designer clutch and produced a heavy, leather-bound beverage menu. She shoved the stiff leather against my chest. Her manicured nails scraped against the fabric of my dress. She did not ask a question. She issued a direct order. Her influencer friends expected premium treatment. She informed me they wanted a specific vintage reserve champagne. The listed price was $3,000 per bottle. Tiffany leaned in close, delivering a vicious, whispered threat. She told me not to embarrass the hosts. She demanded I walk over to the bartender, hand over my corporate plastic, and secure the vintage reserve for her table. It was the classic William family maneuver, perfectly executed. She wanted to demand the funds drain my resources and simultaneously take all the social credit for the extravagant purchase. I looked at my younger sister. I analyzed her posture, her demanding tone, and her supreme sense of entitlement. Tiffany was a product of our parents and their toxic instruction. Growing up, Richard and Valerie taught her that rules did not apply to attractive people. They shielded her from consequences and praised her ability to manipulate situations for personal gain. She learned to view my quiet tech career not as a respectable profession, but as a convenient, endless ATM designed to fund her desires. I did not flinch. I did not argue or raise my voice. I gently pushed the leather menu back toward her chest. I offered her a serene, practiced gaze. I turned my head and locked eyes with a passing server. He stopped, immediately recognizing the unspoken authority in my posture. The hostess would like to add a bottle of your finest vintage reserve to her tab, I instructed the server smoothly. Please ensure the charge is routed directly to the primary manifest under William Enterprises. The server nodded, offering a crisp, professional bow. He turned on his heel, heading straight for the premium liquor vault to fulfill the extravagant order. Tiffany stood paralyzed. her jaw locked tight. The muscles in her neck strained against her heavy contour makeup. She could not scream or throw a tantrum in the middle of the crowded VIP deck. She was trapped by the very audience she had invited to witness her glory. She forced a rigid, hollow grin, nodding at the passing socialites, while her eyes burned with suppressed rage. She spun around and marched toward the opposite end of the pavilion to find our father. I watched her walk away. I felt a brief, fleeting sense of victory. Deflecting the $3,000 charge was a tactical win. But the real twist, the revelation that would permanently alter the trajectory of my life, occurred mere moments later. In her blind anger, Tiffany had made a critical technical error. When she shoved the menu against my chest, she hastily dropped her smartphone back into her clutch. She thought she had terminated the live broadcast. She was wrong. The video feed was obscured by the dark interior of her purse, but the audio microphone remained active. She was unknowingly broadcasting a live audio stream to thousands of digital strangers. I retreated to a quiet corner near a towering floral arrangement. I retrieved my encrypted corporate tablet from my bag. I tapped a hidden shortcut, opening a secure browser. I navigated to my sister and her public profile page. I inserted a discreet wireless earpiece, hiding the small device beneath my dark hair. The ambient noise of the rooftop faded as I isolated the audio feed, transmitting directly from the depths of her purse. I listened to the rustling of fabric. Then I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of her heels across the wooden deck. She located Richard. I could hear the clinking of his cocktail glass. The conversation I intercepted was chilling. It extinguished any lingering shred of familial guilt I might have harbored. Tiffany did not complain about the champagne deflection. Her voice trembled with a different kind of anxiety. She asked Richard a direct, pointed question. "Did the Azure Tower hostess swipe Gemma and her physical card yet?" she whispered. Richard chuckled. His voice was thick with arrogance and premium bourbon. He assured her the plastic was locked in the venue safe. He bragged about the flawless open tab generating unlimited credit. Then Tiffany spoke the words that severed our bloodline forever. "Good," she replied, her tone dripping with malice. "I am so glad I saw that banking envelope in her mail stack. If I had not told you to grab it while she was in the kitchen, we would be paying for this entire night ourselves." The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. My lungs forgot how to draw air. Tiffany was not just a spoiled bystander reaping the benefits of our parents and their poor decisions. She was the architect. She was an active, willing co-conspirator who orchestrated the initial mail theft. She spotted the replacement corporate card. She instructed our father to steal it. They had conspired as a unit to commit identity theft against their own flesh and blood. It was a premeditated criminal conspiracy. The last shred of empathy I held for my family vanished into the dry Nevada wind. They were not misguided social climbers making poor choices under pressure. They were calculating predators, willing to destroy my financial future to buy a few hours of artificial prestige. I removed the earpiece and placed it back into my bag. The cold, calculating architecture of my mind locked into its final combat configuration. I no longer viewed them as relatives. I viewed them as hostile entities trapped inside a financial snare I had designed. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement. I scanned the terrace with predatory focus. I was ready for the next phase of the audit. I needed to ensure the venue management understood the precise legal parameters of the impending disaster. I needed to speak with Victor. As if summoned by my tactical shift, I saw the general manager striding across the deck, heading straight for the bar. The night was about to escalate. The illuminated onyx surface of the main bar offered a brief sanctuary from the chaotic terrace. I navigated through the dense sea of socialites, moving away from the towering floral displays and the suffocating perfume of the crowd. 5 bartenders operated in synchronized motion, shaking complex cocktails and pouring expensive spirits into crystal tumblers. I secured a vacant pocket of space at the far end of the polished counter. I required a moment to recalibrate my tactical approach. Intercepting Tiffany and her damning audio broadcast had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the evening. Before I could signal a bartender for a fresh beverage, a tall, imposing figure materialized beside me. It was Victor, the general manager of the Azure Tower. He possessed a commanding physical presence, wearing a pristine charcoal suit tailored to exact specifications. Victor did not project the loud, desperate vanity characteristic of my father. He carried the quiet, authentic authority of a professional who controlled a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire. Victor and I shared a distinct working history. We crossed paths 3 years ago during a cross-departmental vulnerability audit. I was a junior risk analyst tasked with reviewing vendor procurement logs across the resort portfolio. During my investigation, I uncovered a sophisticated embezzlement ring operated by a trusted beverage distributor. I presented my findings directly to Victor, bypassing the standard chain of command to prevent the corrupt vendor from erasing their digital tracks. Victor respected my clinical efficiency and my refusal to bow to internal corporate politics. We maintained a silent, mutual, professional respect ever since. He stepped up to the glowing counter and signaled the nearest bartender with a subtle raise of his index finger. The bartender immediately abandoned his station, delivering 2 chilled glasses of mineral water. Victor slid 1 glass toward me. He did not offer a wide smile or a loud greeting. In the casino industry, the most critical conversations always occur in hushed tones. "Your father possesses quite the appetite for our vintage reserves tonight," Victor murmured, keeping his gaze fixed on the glittering Las Vegas skyline. "He is keeping my staff exceptionally busy." I picked up the glass, feeling the cold condensation against my palm. "I expect his thirst will continue to escalate as the night progresses," I replied. "I assume he visited the hostess stand upon his arrival?" Victor nodded slowly, taking a measured sip of his water. He arrived an hour before the primary guest list. He was highly insistent about placing a specific corporate card on file to cover any overages beyond the initial booking parameters. He physically handed the plastic to my lead hostess. She swiped it through the primary terminal. The system returned a standard approval code. He appeared quite pleased with himself. I stared at the rising bubbles in my glass. The trap functioned flawlessly on the front end. To my father, that glowing green approval checkmark signaled unlimited access to my financial resources. He believed he had successfully executed his identity theft. "The approval code is a phantom," I explained to Victor, keeping my voice low. "I instituted a shadow hold on that specific account number on Tuesday afternoon. The terminal communicated exclusively with my department's security sandbox, not the actual merchant banking gateway. The venue system believes the card is viable, but 0 funds are tethered to the swipe." Victor turned his head slightly to look at me. A faint glimmer of professional admiration flickered in his eyes. He understood the architecture of the maneuver. He knew that when the event concluded and the system attempted to capture the final funds, the shadow hold would evaporate. The terminal would reject the transaction, triggering an automatic default to the primary signatories on the contract. "It is a brilliant piece of risk management, Gemma," he said softly. "However, I must ensure you understand the current operational landscape of this resort. The Hospitality Board implemented a severe policy shift late last month." I turned my full attention to him. "The casino industry constantly evolves its security protocols to combat sophisticated fraud. I needed to know every variable in the current equation. We experienced a string of significant losses over the summer," Victor continued. "Wealthy patrons were booking elite venues, running up astronomical tabs, and issuing fraudulent chargebacks the following morning. Our corporate legal team grew tired of chasing these debts through civil litigation and prolonged collections processes. They instituted a zero-tolerance protocol for unpaid balances exceeding $10,000. He paused, letting the weight of the number settle between us. I knew the current tab was already hurtling past $15,000. "We no longer send large delinquent folios to collections," Victor stated, his tone dropping an octave. "We do not offer payment plans. We do not negotiate terms on the following business day. If a guest attempts to exit the premises without satisfying a balance over $10,000, we initiate an immediate theft of services protocol." I kept my expression perfectly neutral. In the state of Nevada, defrauding an innkeeper is not a minor civil dispute. It is a serious crime. The local statutes exist to protect the casinos from predators. The protocol requires mandatory law enforcement involvement on site. Victor elaborated, "My security team will detain the responsible parties. We will dispatch the local Metropolitan Police to the venue. The individuals will be escorted off the property in handcuffs and charged with felony fraud. There is zero flexibility in this corporate directive." A cold, deep satisfaction settled into the center of my chest. Just 30 minutes ago, I might have felt a brief pang of hesitation. I might have worried about the severe legal consequences facing my family. But the intercepted audio broadcast from Tiffany and her purse had eradicated my mercy. They willingly plotted to destroy my future. Now they were going to face the unforgiving reality of the justice system they thought they were above. The stakes officially escalated. This was no longer a bitter family dispute over unpaid dinners. This was a high-level corporate fraud investigation playing out in real time. My parents were not merely stealing from their daughter. They were actively attempting to defraud a major Las Vegas casino resort. "I understand the policy, Victor," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. "I expect you to execute your corporate duties without any hesitation." Victor tilted his head, acknowledging the directive. "When the event concludes and the final balance is tallied, how would you like my team to proceed?" he asked. I set my glass down on the illuminated onyx counter. "Ensure the final folio is presented exclusively to the holding company listed on the original event manifest I instructed. The contract is bound to Richard and Valerie William, operating under William Enterprises. Do not allow them to reference my name. Do not allow them to deflect the liability. They requested this party. They must accept the receipt." Victor offered a single, decisive nod. He understood his assignment. He was essentially acting as the executioner for my financial audit. "I will have my lead security personnel flank me when I present the check," he said. "We will ensure the velvet rope secures the perimeter of the cabana until the balance is resolved or the authorities arrive." "Thank you, Victor," I said. He turned away from the bar, blending seamlessly back into the crowded terrace. I watched him disappear into the sea of guests. The trap was now legally verified and reinforced by casino security. I took a deep breath of the warm desert air. I felt lighter than I had in years. The invisible chains of familial obligation were disintegrating. But the night was not over. The tab needed to grow higher to ensure the felony threshold was irrefutably breached. I turned my gaze back toward the VIP section. Through the parting crowd, I saw Richard marching directly toward me. His face was flushed with expensive liquor and unearned pride. He was leaving the safety of his cabana to seek me out. He looked emboldened, entirely oblivious to the criminal net closing around him. He was ready to push his luck even further, and I needed to provide him with the perfect bait. The glittering terrace buzzed with the frantic energy of a casino floor just before midnight. I tracked Richard as he maneuvered through the dense crowd of revelers. He carried a fresh bourbon in his hand, walking with the exaggerated swagger of a man who believed he owned the skyline. Before he could reach the Onyx bar, I altered my trajectory to intercept him near the central catering station. I wanted our interaction to happen in a highly visible location. The catering crew had erected a towering ice sculpture in the middle of the deck. It depicted a soaring eagle with its wings spread wide, catching the neon reflections of the nearby hotels. The frozen monument was already beginning to melt in the warm desert evening, dripping steady streams of water into a silver basin below. It was a perfect metaphor for my parents and their evaporating illusion of wealth. Valerie stood near the sculpture, adjusting the neckline of her sequined gown, while conversing with a local real estate developer. I approached them with a deliberate, tactical plan. In the realm of cryptographic security, analysts often deploy a defensive mechanism known as a honeypot. A honeypot is a decoy system designed to look incredibly valuable and highly vulnerable. It lures hostile actors inward, keeping them distracted while the security team monitors their methods and traps them inside the network. My father required a psychological honeypot. If I remained silent, standing in the shadows, he might naturally slow his consumption. He might glance at a menu and experience a fleeting moment of budget anxiety. I needed to ensure he felt invincible. I needed the final invoice to swell so high that no wealthy acquaintance could bail him out with a casual loan. I had to weaponize his pathological need to oppose me. I had to trigger his fragile ego. I adjusted my posture, rounding my shoulders to appear small and intimidated. I wrung my hands together, letting a nervous tremor enter my fingers. I stepped into his line of sight just as he took a sip of his expensive liquor. "Dad?" I whispered, keeping my tone hesitant and laced with manufactured panic. "This event is getting incredibly expensive. I just looked at the menu prices." Richard paused, holding his glass suspended in the air. Valerie turned away from the real estate developer, her eyes narrowing as she studied my face. I played the role of the anxious, budget-conscious daughter to perfection. "Maybe we should close the open bar," I suggested, shrinking back slightly. "We could switch to a cash model for the rest of the night. The guests have already had plenty to drink. We need to control the spending before it gets out of hand." The reaction was instantaneous. A flush of pure, supreme victory colored my father and his cheeks. He looked at Valerie, sharing a condescending, triumphant glance. He interpreted my warning exactly as I intended. He saw my caution as my standard stinginess. He believed my corporate salary was vast, but my personality was rigid and boring. In his mind, he was wielding my financial power much better than I ever could. He thought he was teaching me a lesson in high society hospitality. He laughed. It was a loud, booming sound designed specifically to draw the attention of the surrounding socialites. Several heads turned in our direction, including the wealthy wives of his country club peers. Richard puffed out his chest, standing taller in his velvet dinner jacket. He felt powerful and untouchable, protected by the ghost account resting in the venue's safe. He decided to punish me for daring to question his hosting abilities. He wanted to demonstrate his dominance in front of an audience. He snapped his fingers, flagging down the terrace captain, who was supervising the catering staff. The captain hurried over, carrying a digital order pad. "We are keeping the bar wide open," Richard declared, his voice carrying over the thumping background music. "In fact, extend the beverage service for an additional 2 hours past the original contract. Keep the vintage champagne flowing to every cabana." The captain nodded, tapping the instructions into his screen. Richard was not finished. He glared at me with a spiteful glint in his eye, pushing his chips to the center of the table. "And bring out the top-tier caviar service," Richard commanded. "The Beluga Reserve. I want a seafood tower placed at every VIP seating area. Do not spare any expense tonight. We are celebrating." The captain bowed crisp and professional before rushing off to execute the staggering new orders. Richard turned back to me, raising his glass in a mock toast. He wanted to ensure I felt the financial sting of his retaliation. "Do not be cheap at your own party, Gemma," he mocked loudly, ensuring the nearby country club friends could hear every word. "We work hard to project a certain standard in this city. Try to enjoy the luxury for once in your life instead of counting pennies in the corner." A few of the surrounding guests chuckled at his remark. They sipped their free drinks and looked at me with mild pity. They viewed me as the ungrateful, tight-fisted tech worker trying to ruin a beautiful evening. They viewed my father as a generous patriarch, sparing no expense for his family. I lowered my head, allowing my dark hair to fall forward and obscure my face. To the casual observer, I looked thoroughly humiliated. I appeared defeated by my father and his grand public reprimand. In reality, I was hiding a razor-sharp smile. The diversionary bait functioned flawlessly. He took the hook and swallowed it whole. Driven entirely by his desperate need to look wealthy, he was aggressively running up a bill that would destroy his life. The ledger in my mind ticked upward, leaping past $16,000 and racing toward $18,000. The felony threshold was shattered. The legal trap was now a concrete, inescapable vault. I analyzed the people laughing alongside him. These elite peers were the ultimate fair-weather friends. In the Las Vegas hospitality ecosystem, loyalty is purchased and friendship is rented. These socialites only associated with Richard because he was providing top-shelf entertainment. The moment his credit evaporated, they would scatter like insects under a bright light. They did not actually care about him. They were simply vultures feasting on his hubris. He was buying the temporary affection of ruthless strangers using a fraudulent credential. It was a spectacular tragedy of his own making. I lifted my head, my expression returning to a neutral, polite mask. I nodded, silently, accepting his public rebuke, and stepped backward, fading into the perimeter of the crowd. Richard beamed with satisfaction. He believed he had won the confrontation. He adjusted his jacket and strutted away toward the cigar lounge, eager to boast about his extravagant seafood orders to a local politician. He left Valerie standing near the melting ice eagle. My mother did not follow him. She smoothed the fabric of her borrowed dress and turned her attention to the influential wives gathered near the cabanas. She held her crystal glass delicately, preparing to deliver her own performance for the audience. As I watched her weave a fabricated narrative for the wealthy onlookers, the emotional toll of the evening began to crest. The financial trap was secured, but the psychological warfare was entering its most agonizing phase. I stood in the warm desert breeze, preparing to listen to the woman who gave birth to me lie to the world. The desert wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of ozone and heated asphalt from the sprawling valley below. I stood near the transparent perimeter of the terrace, resting my hands against the cool, thick glass. The vivid neon illumination from the neighboring casinos reflected off the barrier, painting my skin in alternating shades of electric blue and crimson. Midnight approached. The frantic energy of the gathering began to curdle into a heavy, intoxicated lethargy. The elite guests had consumed their fill of top-shelf spirits, and their conversations degraded into sloppy boasting. A few yards away, my mother held her own captive audience. Valerie anchored a cluster of influential wives positioned perfectly beneath a cascading arrangement of imported white orchids. She stood shoulder to shoulder with the spouse of a prominent district judge and the partner of a commercial real estate mogul. These were the exact women my mother spent her entire adult life attempting to mirror. She mirrored their designer garments, their exclusive vacation destinations, and their polished, hollow mannerisms. I observed her through the refractive glow of the patio heaters. Valerie swirled a fresh martini, allowing the olive to clink softly against the crystal rim. She leaned inward, adopting a posture of manufactured intimacy. Her voice carried over the ambient lounge music, engineered for maximum projection. "We just wanted to spoil her tonight," Valerie declared, her tone dripping with rehearsed maternal warmth. "Gemma works so incredibly hard at that corporate office. She never takes time for herself. Her father and I decided we needed to step in and orchestrate a proper celebration. She deserves the world." The surrounding women offered synchronized murmurs of approval. They nodded their frosted heads, lifting their own glasses in a gesture of solidarity. They praised Valerie for her generous spirit and her impeccable event planning. Hearing those words fall from her lips triggered a visceral reaction in my chest. For a fleeting, solitary second, a profound wave of grief washed over me. It was not a superficial sorrow. It was the deep, agonizing mourning of an orphaned child who realizes her caretakers are merely ghosts. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and grieved for the mother I wished I possessed. I longed for parents who genuinely desired to celebrate my milestone birthday. I wanted a family who saw my cryptographic security career as an impressive achievement rather than a convenient funding source. I wanted a mother who bragged about my intellect, not the fabricated wealth she pretended to bestow upon me. Instead, I was relegated to the role of a stage prop. I existed solely to elevate their social standing in front of strangers. Growing up, Valerie taught me that affection was entirely transactional. During my childhood, she rarely attended my academic decathlons or my science fairs because those arenas offered no prestige. However, when I secured my executive title at the resort group, she immediately ordered custom stationery boasting about her daughter, the corporate director. She utilized my professional success as a weapon at her country club luncheons, demanding respect from women who otherwise ignored her. She did not love me. She loved the utility I provided. The brief, intoxicating wave of sorrow began to recede. The warm tears threatening to gather at the corners of my eyes dried before they could fall. The grief rapidly cooled, hardening into an impenetrable layer of titanium steel around my heart. I realized a fundamental truth standing there in the Las Vegas night. For 30 years, I believed that keeping the peace was a noble sacrifice. I thought enduring their financial abuse was the price of maintaining a family connection. But keeping the peace only meant losing myself. It meant erasing my own identity to maintain their fragile illusion. Every time I paid a delinquent bill or absorbed a public humiliation, I handed them another piece of my autonomy. If I walked away from this confrontation tonight, if I allowed them to escape the consequences of their identity theft, I would be complicit in my own destruction. I refused to be the sacrificial lamb upon the altar of their vanity any longer. I was ready to bury the family I actually had. The tension on the rooftop escalated, reaching a boiling point only I could measure. A procession of uniform-clad servers emerged from the venue kitchen. They carried towering silver tiers packed with crushed ice and the Beluga Reserve caviar my father had ordered to spite me moments earlier. The waiters distributed the opulent seafood to every VIP cabana, alongside fresh bottles of vintage reserve champagne. The country club elites gasped in delight at the sudden influx of extreme luxury. They toasted Richard and Valerie, praising their unmatched generosity. The sheer audacity of the display was breathtaking. My parents were smiling, nodding, and accepting the adoration, while simultaneously executing a felony. I performed a rapid mental calculation, updating the digital ledger burned into my memory. The initial venue booking required $12,000. The earlier premium liquor requests added another $3,000. The extended bar hours and this final, staggering caviar service pushed the total far beyond the original projections. The tab was quietly crossing the $18,000 threshold. $18,000. It was a sum that could ruin a working-class family. It was a figure that elevated their crime from a petty misdemeanor to a severe statutory offense under Nevada hospitality law. They had constructed a financial bomb and strapped it to their own chests. I turned my back on the glittering skyline and faced the pavilion. The guests were gorging themselves on the stolen feast. Tiffany was posing near the DJ booth, oblivious to the criminal disaster she helped orchestrate. Richard was laughing uproariously, slapping a local politician on the back. Valerie was sipping her martini, basking in the false praise. I raised my left wrist, pushing back the sleeve of my black dress. I checked the luminous dial of my silver timepiece. It read 12:25 in the morning. The agreed-upon timeline with the general manager was rapidly approaching. The background music suddenly lowered, dipping into a muted, rhythmic pulse. The ambient chatter of the crowd quieted as a shift in the atmosphere occurred. At the center of the largest cabana, Richard stepped onto a raised platform, holding a silver spoon and his fresh crystal flute. He intended to command the attention of the entire room. He was preparing to deliver his grand public toast. This was the moment he planned to spring his ultimate social trap. This was the exact sequence where he intended to corner me into handing over my stolen plastic in front of 150 witnesses. I lowered my arm. My pulse beat with a slow, steady rhythm. The sensory details of the rooftop sharpened into hyper-realistic focus. I felt the cool condensation on my water glass. I heard the clinking of silverware against porcelain. I saw the arrogant, victorious gleam in my father and his eyes. It was almost time for the grand finale. The explosive confrontation was no longer a distant theoretical scenario. It was seconds away. I squared my shoulders and began walking slowly toward the center of the VIP section, ready to dismantle their world. Before stepping into the center of the audience, I required absolute numerical certainty. As my father continued tapping his silver spoon against the crystal flute, drawing the attention of the intoxicated crowd, I altered my trajectory. I utilized the surrounding distraction to slip away from the main terrace. I pushed through an unmarked heavy wooden door bridging the gap between the glittering party and the restricted service corridor. The sudden environmental shift was jarring. the thumping bass of the lounge music instantly muffled behind the thick acoustic paneling. The intoxicating aromas of expensive perfumes and premium cigars vanished, replaced by the sterile, sharp scent of industrial floor cleaner. Harsh fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, casting long, clinical shadows against bare, cinder block walls. This hidden hallway was the raw, mechanical skeleton of the Azure Tower. It was a space designed strictly for utility, entirely devoid of the superficial vanity polluting the rooftop outside. I leaned my shoulders against the cold, painted brick. I retrieved my encrypted corporate tablet from my leather clutch. I pressed my thumb against the biometric sensor located at the base of the device. The screen illuminated instantly, casting a pale blue glow across my face. I bypassed the standard visual interfaces, navigating directly into the command terminal of the resort network. My fingers moved with practiced, rapid precision as I entered the required administrative credentials to access the live point-of-sale data stream for the rooftop pavilion. The digital ledger materialized on the monitor. It was a stark black screen filled with scrolling green text detailing every single financial transaction occurring on the terrace in real time. I located the primary manifest filed under William Enterprises. I isolated the billing column and watched the numbers escalate. The current tally rested at $16,400. Seeing that specific figure quantified on a secure screen forced the oxygen from my lungs. $16,000 represented a lifetime of my family and their shallow priorities. It was the exact numerical equivalent of the elite country club initiation fee my parents purchased on credit while I worked graveyard shifts to pay my basic utility bills. It was the cost of the designer furniture they bought to stage their suburban living room for guests they secretly despised. Every single dollar compiling on the monitor was another heavy nail driven into their social coffin. They viewed money not as a tool for security or stability, but as ammunition for their endless class warfare. The screen refreshed, executing a rapid data pull from the terrace terminals. The venue captain was officially entering the extravagant orders my father commanded moments earlier. I monitored the itemized list as it populated the screen. 6 towering displays of Beluga Reserve caviar generated a massive charge. 4 additional bottles of the vintage champagne requested by my sister hit the ledger. The overall total flashed aggressively. $17,200. A sudden, suffocating pressure seized my chest. The atmospheric weight of the situation threatened to crush my practiced composure. I was executing the most dangerous maneuver of my professional career against my own bloodline. If my custom cryptographic firewall contained a single flawed line of code, the entire operation would collapse. If the shadow hold I placed on my stolen physical card fractured under the strain of the venue merchant gateway, the catastrophic consequences would be immediate. That massive unauthorized debt would instantly bypass their holding company and transfer directly to my personal accounts. The transaction would obliterate my flawless credit score. The subsequent fraud investigation would flag my profile within the casino employment registry. My high-level security clearance would be permanently revoked. My lucrative career as a risk management director would be annihilated in a matter of seconds. I would be dragged violently back into the suffocating cycle of poverty and debt my parents perpetuated. The stakes were absolute. There was zero margin for error. I closed my eyes and engaged a tactical breathing exercise I utilized during high-pressure corporate audits. I inhaled the sterile, conditioned air, counting the seconds, allowing the oxygen to stabilize my heart rate. I opened my eyes and scrutinized the scrolling green text. I analyzed the routing pathways tethered to the latest transactions. My cryptographic architecture was entirely flawless. The foundational code remained impenetrable. The system recognized the stolen plastic as a ghost entity. It absorbed the massive swipes generated by the hostess terminal, but immediately deflected the financial liability away from my bank vault. The algorithm identified the primary contract signatories and securely anchored the accumulating debt to William Enterprises. The trap held perfectly firm. The monitor refreshed one final time. The bartender closed out the extended beverage service, applying the final taxes and premium gratuity percentages required by hospitality law. The ultimate figure solidified at the bottom of the column: $18,450. The felony threshold was completely shattered. The legal snare was pulled completely tight. There was no possible avenue of escape for Richard or Valerie. I locked the device and slid the tablet back into my clutch. A cool draft of air swept down the empty corridor, originating from the industrial ventilation ducts above. The chill swept across my skin, bringing a profound sense of clarity. Staring into the blank screen of the powered-down tablet, I saw my own reflection. I was no longer the invisible, expendable daughter waiting quietly in the shadows. I was no longer the flexible asset they could manipulate and drain at their convenience. I had fundamentally evolved. I was the architect of my own life. I possessed the intellect and the sheer, ruthless will to dismantle the people who sought to destroy me. The new secret was fully verified. The financial weapon was loaded, and the safety mechanism was permanently disengaged. It was time to pull the trigger. I pushed away from the cinder block wall. I smoothed the fabric of my black dress, ensuring my appearance remained immaculate. I reached out and grasped the heavy brass handle of the service door. I pushed the barrier open, stepping out of the stark mechanical hallway and returning to the chaotic, glittering illusion of the rooftop. The transition back into the sensory overload of the party was seamless. The music pulsed through the deck. The socialites murmured in drunken anticipation. The neon skyline loomed in the background, casting brilliant colors across the pavilion. I walked with measured, deliberate steps toward the center of the VIP section. My father stood on his raised platform, his silver spoon poised against the crystal glass, ready to deliver his deceptive speech. I took my place among the wealthy onlookers, entirely prepared to oversee the public execution of my family and their toxic Vegas vanity. I stepped back onto the terrace just as the digital display on a distant casino marquee flashed 12:30 in the morning. The warm desert breeze caught the fabric of my dress, brushing it against my legs, as I navigated the perimeter of the pavilion. The sensory shift from the stark service corridor to the vibrant rooftop was profound. The air hung heavy with the cloying scent of expensive botanical perfumes and the rich smoke of premium cigars. The ambient lounge music pulsed through hidden speakers, providing a steady, rhythmic heartbeat to the gathering. Then the thumping bass vanished. The abrupt silence was jarring. It rippled across the deck like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter faded into confused murmurs. The elite guests turned their heads, searching for the source of the interruption. All attention gravitated toward the central VIP cabana. Richard stood upon the raised teakwood platform anchoring the extravagant seating area. He commanded the room with practiced theatricality. In his right hand, he held a crystal champagne flute. In his left, he wielded a small silver spoon. He tapped the polished metal against the delicate rim of the glass. The sharp, clear ringing cut through the remaining chatter, demanding total submission from his audience. He wore his tailored velvet jacket unbuttoned, projecting the relaxed confidence of a patriarch who owned the entire skyline. His face was flushed with expensive liquor and the intoxicating high of his own perceived brilliance. He reached out and wrapped his arm tightly around Tiffany, pulling her close to his side. My younger sister beamed under the spotlight, leaning her head against his shoulder. She held her smartphone steady at waist level, ensuring the camera lens captured every second of the unfolding spectacle. Richard raised his chin and scanned the sea of upturned faces. His eyes locked onto me where I stood near the edge of the velvet rope. He did not ask me to step forward. He issued a silent, arrogant command. He gestured with his silver spoon, ushering me into the center of the arena. I did not hesitate. I walked through the parted crowd with measured, deliberate steps. The country club socialites and local politicians stepped aside, clearing a narrow path for my approach. I felt their curious gazes sweeping over my understated attire. They evaluated my worth based on the brands I wore and found me lacking compared to my glamorous mother and sister. I maintained a serene mask, betraying zero emotion. I stepped onto the raised platform, taking my place on the opposite side of the glass coffee table, facing my family. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed, his voice echoing over the neon-lit valley, "tonight we celebrate family. Tonight we celebrate legacy." A ripple of polite applause fluttered through the crowd. Richard smiled, soaking in the adoration. "Look around you," he continued, extending his arms to encompass the lavish rooftop. "We brought together the finest minds, the most influential voices, and the dearest friends in this city. Valerie and I wanted to curate an evening of unparalleled elegance. We wanted to share our blessings with the people who matter most. From the Beluga Reserve to the vintage pours, we spared zero expense to ensure this gathering was unforgettable." Valerie stood a few feet away, dabbing the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. She played the role of the overwhelmed, grateful matriarch flawlessly. The guests murmured their appreciation, raising their glasses in a synchronized salute to their generous hosts. But as much as I would love to take all the credit for this spectacular evening, Richard announced, lowering his voice into a tone of manufactured humility, "I must confess the truth. This night belongs to my eldest daughter." He turned his gaze toward me. The triumphant gleam in his eye was unmistakable. He was maneuvering the final pieces of his scheme into place. He was constructing the social cage he intended to lock me inside. "Gemma works tirelessly in the corporate sector," he proclaimed, addressing the silent crowd. "She is so fiercely dedicated to her career that she often forgets to enjoy the fruits of her labor." When Valerie and I began planning this milestone 30th birthday celebration, Gemma was deeply moved. She was so overwhelmed by our efforts to organize this breathtaking event that she made a firm, uncompromising demand. The audience leaned in, captivated by the narrative. They loved stories of familial devotion and intergenerational wealth. Gemma insisted on taking care of the venue tonight. Richard declared, his voice rising to a dramatic crescendo. She told me she wanted her mother and me to simply relax and enjoy the company of our esteemed peers. She demanded to shoulder the financial obligations of this party as a token of her profound gratitude for everything we have given her. The terrace erupted. 150 members of the Las Vegas elite broke into enthusiastic applause. The sound was deafening. They cheered for my supposed generosity. They clapped for my fabricated subservience. Valerie smiled a radiant, camera-ready grin, clasping her hands together in mock delight. Tiffany aimed her phone directly at my face, documenting the exact moment the trap snapped shut. The psychological architecture of the ambush was brilliant in its cruelty. Richard understood human nature. He knew that people fear public humiliation far more than they fear financial ruin. By declaring me the benefactor in front of his powerful peers, he made it socially impossible for me to refuse the bill without looking like a monster. If I denied the charge now, I would humiliate my parents in front of the exact individuals they worshipped. I would be branded a stingy, ungrateful child who ruined a beautiful gesture. He banked his entire reputation on my primal fear of the tribe turning against me. He expected me to lower my head, produce my stolen physical card, and silently fund his illusion to preserve the peace. Right on cue, the crowd parted near the private elevators. The heavy velvet rope guarding our cabana was unhooked and tossed aside. Victor, the general manager of the Azure Tower, stepped onto the teakwood platform. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. Victor did not wear the obsequious smile of a hospitality worker delivering a routine check. His expression was carved from granite. He moved with chilling professional purpose. He was not alone. Flanking him on either side were two towering security guards dressed in immaculate dark suits. The guards possessed the broad shoulders and silent intensity of men trained to handle hostile escalations. The guests closest to the platform stopped clapping. Their smiles faltered as they registered the sudden, imposing presence of venue security. The celebratory mood fractured, replaced by a sharp, buzzing tension. Victor stopped directly in front of the glass coffee table separating me from my father. In his hands, he carried a thick, black leather folio. The silver-embossed logo of the resort caught the ambient neon light. He did not speak. He did not offer a polite word of gratitude for their patronage. He simply lowered the folio and placed it squarely in the center of the transparent glass surface. The heavy leather hit the table with a dull, definitive thud. Richard did not notice the rigid posture of the security personnel. He was too intoxicated by his own performance. He believed Victor was delivering the final prop for his grand finale. Richard stepped forward, beaming with arrogant triumph. He reached out and placed his hand flat against the textured leather cover. With a smooth, theatrical motion, he slid the folio across the smooth glass, pushing it directly toward my side of the table. "All right, sweetheart," Richard laughed, his voice carrying clearly into the silence of the VIP section. "Time to handle the paperwork for your old man." The music remained off. The ambient chatter was entirely extinguished. 150 pairs of eyes bounced between my face and the black book resting near my hands. The wealthy socialites held their breath, anticipating the final transaction. Tiffany kept her phone raised, the recording light blinking a steady, rhythmic red. The tension pressing down on the platform was unbearable. The air felt thick enough to shatter. They were waiting for the quiet, boring tech worker to open her leather clutch. They were waiting for me to pull out my plastic and validate their lavish existence. The entire facade of the William family hinged on my next physical movement. What happens in the subsequent 30 seconds would fundamentally alter the trajectory of our lives forever. The black leather folio rested upon the transparent surface of the coffee table. The silver-embossed logo of the resort caught the ambient neon light filtering through the terrace perimeter. 150 influential guests held their breath. The wealthy onlookers expected me to perform my designated role. They anticipated a quick, compliant motion where I would reach into my clutch, retrieve a metallic corporate card, and quietly finance the extravagant spectacle my father had orchestrated. I did not reach for the leather book. I did not flinch under the crushing weight of their collective scrutiny. Instead, I raised my right hand and grasped the stem of my crystal water goblet. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The condensation chilled my palm. The sparkling liquid moistened my throat. In high-stakes corporate negotiations, silence is a weapon. Slow, measured movements establish dominance over frantic, hostile counterparts. I let the quiet stretch, allowing the unbearable tension to wrap around my parents like a tightening wire. I lowered the goblet and set it back upon the teakwood coaster. The soft clink of the glass against the wood sounded like a gavel striking a block. I smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the precise, calibrated smile I utilized when dismantling fraudulent vendors in secure boardroom meetings. "I think there has been a misunderstanding, Dad," I said. My voice was stripped of any daughterly hesitation. Trained through years of commanding executive security briefings, my tone carried a chilling, unshakable clarity. The acoustics of the VIP pavilion projected my words across the dead, silent rooftop, reaching the furthest corners of the gathered elite. I did not host this gathering. I continued projecting a veneer of polite confusion. "You just delivered an impassioned speech explaining how you put this entire evening together. You claimed you spared zero expense to curate this elegant experience for your friends." The physical transformation of my father was instantaneous. The triumphant, flushed arrogance evaporated from his features. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a pale, sickly gray in its wake. The grand illusion he had spent decades constructing began to fracture right before my eyes. He looked like a pilot realizing his parachute was defective, miles above the earth. His jaw worked silently for a fraction of a second, unable to process the unprecedented defiance. A low murmur rippled through the surrounding socialites. The country club peers my parents worshipped were predators wrapped in designer clothing. They possessed a primal instinct for detecting weakness within their ranks. The wife of a prominent district judge leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. A local real estate developer lowered his vintage champagne, suddenly highly interested in the fracturing family dynamic. The whispers started as a soft hiss, blending with the desert wind. Richard stepped forward, abandoning his theatrical posture. He leaned over the glass barrier, attempting to physically intimidate me with his proximity. His tailored velvet jacket strained against his shoulders. The polished veneer of the wealthy patriarch dissolved, revealing a desperate, terrified man. "Gemma, stop playing around," he hissed, pushing the words through gritted teeth. His volume was low, intended only for my ears, but the sheer panic in his vocal cords made the threat sound hollow. "Hand over your card. Everyone is watching." He relied on his oldest, most reliable tactic. He weaponized public shame. For my entire life, Richard operated under the assumption that my fear of embarrassing the bloodline far outweighed my instinct for self-preservation. He trained me to shrink under public scrutiny. He believed if he cornered me in front of an audience of important strangers, I would fold to maintain the fragile peace. He failed to comprehend that the obedient shadow he raised died 5 years ago in a bleak diner booth. Sensing the rapidly deteriorating situation, Valerie moved in to assist the ambush. My mother discarded her role as the weeping, grateful matriarch. Her eyes were wide, round, and frantic. She stepped beside my father, attempting to physically block the view of the nearest politicians. "Sweetheart, do not embarrass us," Valerie pleaded, her voice tight and desperate. Her manicured fingers dug into the edge of the glass table. "Just sign the paper. We can discuss the details tomorrow. Please, just sign it now." Her plea was a masterclass in manipulation. She attempted to frame my refusal as an act of childish rebellion. She wanted to postpone the reckoning, hoping she could bully me into compliance once the influential witnesses departed. She cared entirely about the opinions of rented friends rather than the impending financial ruin of her own child. I remained a pillar of ice. The frantic, chaotic energy radiating from my parents crashed against my serene posture and shattered. I looked directly into my mother and her frantic eyes. "I am not embarrassing anyone, Mom," I replied, my volume rising to ensure the surrounding sharks caught every syllable. "You booked an $18,450 package under your personal holding company without my consent." The exact numerical figure hit the terrace like a physical shockwave. $18,000. It was a staggering sum for a birthday dinner. Exposing the precise cost stripped away the elegant facade of the evening and laid bare the raw, staggering greed of my family. The guests leaned in, visibly scandalized. The whispers intensified into distinct, audible gasps. By naming their personal holding company aloud, I severed the narrative of a generous family celebration. I reframed the event, accurately identifying it as an unauthorized corporate transaction. I exposed their shell corporation to the exact individuals they tried so desperately to impress. Tiffany stood frozen on the periphery of the platform. Her smartphone was still elevated, clutched tightly in her trembling hand. The recording light blinked a steady, rhythmic red. Her live stream was still active, broadcasting the systemic humiliation of our family to thousands of digital strangers. Her influencer audience was witnessing the destruction of her carefully curated, wealthy aesthetic in real time. She was too paralyzed by the unfolding disaster to terminate the feed. Richard opened his mouth to formulate a counterattack, but his mind was paralyzed. He had no contingency plan for open rebellion. He never imagined the cryptographic trap waiting beneath the surface of his stolen plastic. He still operated under the delusion that he held the leverage. I did not allow him the opportunity to regain his footing. The psychological warfare required a swift, definitive pivot. I shifted my gaze away from the pale, terrified faces of my parents. I turned my attention to the stoic, imposing figure standing at the edge of the teakwood platform. Victor stood flanked by his towering security personnel. He held his hands clasped behind his back, projecting the ultimate authority of the venue. He was the neutral third party, the designated executioner of the hospitality audit. I projected my voice, ensuring the real estate developers, the judges, and the country club elites heard the final sequence of the trap. "Victor," I asked, my tone crisp and unyielding, "who is legally bound to this invoice?" Victor advanced one deliberate pace toward the transparent coffee table. His pristine charcoal suit absorbed the ambient neon glow radiating from the neighboring casinos. As the general manager of a premier strip resort, he possessed a formidable presence, forged through years of managing volatile high rollers and intercepting sophisticated grifters. He remained entirely impervious to the suffocating social tension gripping the rooftop pavilion. He did not offer a comforting smile or a deferential bow. He operated strictly as an extension of corporate enforcement. The contract is signed and legally bound to Richard and Valerie. William Victor announced, his rich baritone voice echoing with unwavering authority across the silent terrace. That single sentence struck the teakwood platform with the devastating force of a physical blow. The grand narrative my parents had carefully spun all evening shattered into unrecognizable fragments. Richard suffered an immediate, visceral collapse. The polished, arrogant patriarch who had strutted across the deck just moments prior ceased to exist. His broad chest hollowed inward, causing his custom velvet dinner jacket to hang awkwardly upon his suddenly diminished frame. The sophisticated armor he spent decades building to infiltrate the upper echelons of Nevada high society dissolved into meaningless dust. Sheer terror is a remarkable catalyst. It bypasses rational thought and triggers raw, primitive survival mechanisms. Richard completely forgot about the prominent district judge standing a few feet away. He ignored the influential real estate developers who were currently analyzing his every twitch. Driven by pure financial panic, he lunged toward the glass barrier separating us. His face contorted into a mask of frantic desperation. "But we put her corporate black card on file," Richard shouted, spraying drops of saliva into the arid desert air. "Run the plastic right now. The account is open. Use her profile." By screaming those frantic instructions aloud, my father inadvertently delivered a public confession. He admitted to the assembled country club elites that he never intended to pay for this extravagant celebration. He confirmed he was actively attempting to finance his vanity using a financial instrument belonging to his daughter. The ultimate payoff finally arrived, landing with the crushing momentum of a descending guillotine. I did not match his escalating volume. I did not retreat from his aggressive posture. I leaned slightly forward, locking my gaze onto his terrified, widened eyes. I maintained a serene, chilling composure, honed inside hostile executive boardrooms. "You mean the card you stole from my personal mail?" I asked. My voice sliced through the heavy ambient silence, cutting apart his remaining dignity. Richard froze instantly. His jaw hung slack, but his vocal cords paralyzed. The oxygen seemed to vanish from his lungs. Valerie let out a short, strangled gasp, pressing her manicured hands against her sequined collarbone. I flagged that specific account for fraud on Tuesday afternoon. "Dad," I explained, delivering the tactical revelation with clinical, methodical precision. The issuing banking institution initiated a shadow hold at my direct request. The Azure Tower payment terminal recognized the magnetic strip as a temporary ghost entity. It successfully absorbed your extravagant transactions all evening, but it actively deflected the actual monetary liability away from my personal vault. A sharp, collective intake of breath rippled through the surrounding crowd of socialites. In the unforgiving ecosystem of luxury hospitality, minor financial indiscretions might occasionally be overlooked if properly disguised. Blatant identity theft, however, represented the ultimate unforgivable taboo. Embezzling from a faceless corporation was sometimes viewed as aggressive strategy by these wealthy elites. Stealing mail from your own flesh and blood to fund a superficial party was universally condemned as grotesque. The affluent onlookers reacted with visceral disgust. They physically recoiled, stepping backward in unison. The movement created a rapidly widening circle of isolation around my parents. The very peers Richard sought to impress were now staring at him with undisguised revulsion. They viewed him not as a peer, but as a common, desperate thief. I refused to grant my family a single second to recover their equilibrium. I continued my verbal assault, delivering the unassailable checkmate. Furthermore, I stated, my tone echoing with the absolute authority of a risk management director, I initiated a hard lock across my entire credit portfolio. Because the electronic authorization failed and the physical plastic was flagged within the International Fraud Registry, corporate hospitality law dictates a strict, unyielding default mechanism. The massive debt you accumulated tonight instantly bypasses my profile. It reverts directly to the primary signatories listed on the original booking manifest. The balance defaults entirely to William Enterprises. Richard staggered backward, bumping heavily against the plush leather sofa behind him. The inescapable reality of the shadow hold finally penetrated his panicked mind. He realized the $18,000 tab was not a minor administrative glitch. It was a concrete, devastating financial obligation, permanently anchored to his shell company. For 30 years, he survived by executing financial sleight of hand, manipulating revolving credit lines, and bullying his children into covering his reckless wagers. He always managed to locate a vulnerable loophole or a sympathetic victim. Tonight, he crashed violently into an impenetrable cryptographic wall designed by his own daughter. Victor offered a single crisp nod, confirming the accuracy of my technical assessment. He turned his attention back to my trembling father, showing zero mercy. "That is correct, Mr. William Victor," stated his voice, devoid of any warmth or flexibility. "The venue requires the immediate payment of $18,450. You must settle this balance directly, tonight, using valid funds belonging to your registered holding company. If you cannot produce the necessary liquid capital right now, the authorities will be contacted immediately for theft of services." The threat of imminent law enforcement intervention paralyzed the entire cabana. Committing theft of services in the state of Nevada, particularly involving a sum exceeding $10,000, constitutes a severe felony offense. The local Metropolitan Police would arrive within minutes. They would place my parents in steel handcuffs and march them through the crowded, bustling casino floor in front of thousands of recording tourists. The local news agencies would inevitably acquire the arrest records, thereby obliterating whatever minuscule shred of dignity they still retained. I stood motionless in the center of the spectacle, absorbing the profound magnitude of the victory. I had not merely defended my banking assets from a predatory attack. I had successfully weaponized their own insatiable ambition against them. Their desperate hunger for elevated status, their willingness to sacrifice my stability for a fleeting moment of social glory, provided the exact ammunition required for their downfall. I constructed a flawless legal snare using their own toxic vanity as the primary bait. They were officially trapped inside a legal cage of their own making. The walls were closing in, and there were no exits available. Valerie began to hyperventilate. The mother, who had spent her entire adult life striving for the admiration of elite strangers, now faced the terrifying prospect of a prison cell. She reached out trembling fingers, attempting to grasp my arm across the glass barrier. She silently pleaded for a rescue she did not deserve. I simply took half a step backward, removing myself from her physical reach. I would not allow her to contaminate my victory with her manufactured tears. Tiffany remained stationed near the perimeter of the platform. The aspiring lifestyle influencer appeared catatonic. Her smartphone was still gripped tightly in her palm, the camera lens angled toward the floorboards. She comprehended the severity of the felony charge hovering over our parents. If Richard and Valerie were incarcerated, the superficial empire she relied upon to fund her designer wardrobe and exclusive vacations would instantly disintegrate. She would be forced to abandon her curated internet persona and face the harsh, unforgiving reality of actual labor. The silence stretching across the rooftop was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of traffic navigating the strip below. My father looked at me, a pleading, desperate expression washing over his pale features. He was gathering the breath to deploy his final manipulative tactic, hoping to beg for a daughterly bailout from the disaster he actively engineered. But the power dynamics of our relationship were permanently severed. The vulnerable, compliant girl he intended to exploit was gone forever. In her place stood a ruthless security executive waiting patiently to watch the casino authorities collect their rightful due. The confrontation shifted from a psychological dismantling to a raw, physical standoff. The venue management required their money, and my parents possessed absolutely zero liquidity. The countdown to police intervention began ticking relentlessly in the arid desert air, bringing the promise of ultimate justice. The poetic justice materializing on the rooftop was both instantaneous and devastating. Tiffany remained frozen near the edge of the teakwood platform, holding her smartphone suspended in the air. The bright screen illuminated her pale, terrified face. For the past hour, she had been broadcasting a carefully curated illusion of inherited wealth to an audience of thousands. Now, that same digital portal served as a window to her ultimate humiliation. I watched her thumbs tap frantically against the glass surface, attempting to terminate the live broadcast. Her hands trembled so severely, she kept missing the correct digital prompt. The scrolling chat interface, visible even from my vantage point, transformed into a blur of rapid-fire text. Her devoted influencer followers, who ordinarily praised her designer outfits and lavish lifestyle, instantly turned into a digital mob. They flooded the feed with mocking comments. They posted strings of laughing emojis alongside icons of police sirens. They screenshotted the exact moment her father was exposed as a common thief. Tiffany built her entire identity upon projecting a flawless, affluent aesthetic. She traded in aspirational envy. In a matter of seconds, that aesthetic disintegrated into a viral public scandal. She was no longer a glamorous Las Vegas socialite. She was the daughter of fraudulent grifters caught executing a felony scheme on camera. She finally managed to force the application closed, but the internet possesses an eternal memory. The digital evidence of her ruin was permanently archived, spreading across social media platforms faster than a desert wildfire. While my sister wrestled with her collapsing digital empire, the physical reality on the terrace shifted. The elite guests, comprising the local politicians, real estate moguls, and country club wives, reacted to the revelation with visceral, physical revulsion. These affluent individuals had spent the evening consuming top-tier caviar and vintage champagne under the assumption they were guests of a prosperous peer. Discovering they were actually participating in a grand theft orchestrated against a child severed their social contract immediately. The physical space around our VIP cabana expanded rapidly. The wealthy onlookers stepped backward, moving in synchronized horror. The wife of the prominent district judge whom my mother worshipped set her crystal flute down upon a passing silver tray with a sharp, definitive clink. She did not offer Valerie a sympathetic glance. She simply turned her back, hooked her arm through her husband, and began walking toward the private elevators. The rest of the high society crowd followed her lead. The exodus was silent and brutal. They abandoned the melting ice sculptures and the lavish seafood towers. They distanced themselves from the William family as if proximity alone might infect them with the stench of poverty and fraud. The grand illusion my parents spent decades cultivating shattered into unrecognizable fragments upon the wooden deck. They were exposed naked under the neon skyline, revealed as broke, desperate social climbers attempting to rob their own flesh and blood. The social isolation was profound, but the legal reckoning was rapidly approaching. Recalling the ominous foreshadowing provided earlier in the evening, Victor initiated the venue security protocol. The general manager stood tall, his charcoal suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the glowing casino marquees in the background. He did not need to raise his voice or issue frantic commands. He simply offered a subtle downward nod to the two towering security guards flanking his position. The guards moved with terrifying military precision. They stepped forward, their polished shoes clicking against the teakwood floorboards. They approached the heavy brass stanchions securing the perimeter of the cabana. Throughout the evening, the thick red braided velvet rope served as a powerful symbol of my parents and their desperate vanity. It was a barrier designed to elevate their status and keep the ordinary masses away from their exclusive domain. The security personnel reached down and unclipped the brass hardware. They dragged the heavy stanchions, dragging the metal bases across the wood, creating a low, grating sound. Instead of opening the pathway to the main terrace, they repositioned the barriers directly across the narrow exit steps of the raised platform. They reattached the red velvet cord, pulling it taut across the threshold. The symbol of their elite privilege was instantly weaponized against them. The velvet rope transformed from an instrument of exclusivity into the physical bars of a holding cell. Victor and his guards successfully barricaded Richard, Valerie, and Tiffany inside their own lavish booth. "You will not leave this premises," Victor stated, his baritone voice echoing with chilling hospitality, professionalism. "You will remain within this designated perimeter until the outstanding balance is settled in full or the Metropolitan Police arrive to take you into custody." Richard stood immobilized in the center of the trap. The triumphant, arrogant patriarch who had laughed loudly and mocked my frugality mere minutes ago ceased to exist. His shoulders caved inward, his chest hollowed. The custom velvet dinner jacket hung loosely upon his frame, emphasizing his sudden physical deflation. He looked like a small, pathetic man, stripped of his pride and his stolen armor. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat produced no sound. He had exhausted his repertoire of manipulative tactics. He could not charm, bribe, or bully his way past a corporate security detail demanding liquid capital. Valerie, however, succumbed to a final, desperate surge of survival instinct. My mother lunged toward the edge of the velvet rope, her eyes wide and frantic. She reached up and unclasped the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. She thrust the glittering jewelry toward the general manager, offering it with shaking hands. "Take this," Valerie pleaded, her voice cracking under the strain of her panic. "It is worth more than the invoice. Keep it as collateral. Please, just let us walk away before you call the authorities. We will wire the funds tomorrow morning." Victor did not reach for the necklace. He looked down at the offering with an expression of icy detachment. He recognized the desperate bargaining of a cornered gambler. "The Azure Tower is a corporate hospitality resort," Madame Victor replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy. "We are not a pawn shop. We do not accept leased jewelry or personal collateral to satisfy delinquent accounts. You signed a binding contract. You must produce authorized digital funds or cash. Our theft of services protocol grants you exactly 10 minutes to resolve this ledger before law enforcement is dispatched." Valerie dropped her hand, the diamonds clattering softly against her sequined bodice. She realized her final maneuver had failed. The jewelry was unpaid, hovering on a high-interest credit line. It possessed zero liquid value to a major casino enterprise. She collapsed onto a plush leather sofa, burying her face in her hands. I observed the tableau from my position near the glass coffee table. The dramatic irony cascading over the rooftop was deeply satisfying. My parents dedicated their entire existence to the pursuit of Las Vegas glamour. They worshipped the high-stakes atmosphere of the Strip. They played a dangerous game of financial roulette, betting my stability against their vanity. They forgot the fundamental rule governing this neon-lit city. The house always wins. Tonight, sitting atop the glittering skyline, I was the house. I designed the cryptographic architecture. I audited the risk. I dealt the cards, ensuring the deck was permanently stacked against their fraudulent ambitions. Their social destruction was absolute and perfectly televised to the exact audience they desperately craved. The countdown to their felony arrest continued ticking away in the warm desert breeze. Victor and his guards stood like stone sentinels guarding the velvet rope. My family remained caged within their VIP prison, weeping over the ashes of their reputation. The financial execution was complete. The audit was successfully closed. I picked up my slim leather clutch from the glass table. I smoothed the dark fabric of my dress, preparing to make my final exit. The true conclusion of a high-level corporate engagement does not end with screaming or gloating. It ends with a quiet, decisive departure, leaving the liable parties to face the ruin they engineered. I turned my gaze toward my father, ready to deliver my closing statement before walking out of his life forever. I reached across the transparent surface of the coffee table and wrapped my fingers around the smooth leather of my slim clutch. The physical movement was simple, but it carried the weight of a monumental transition. I stood upright, squaring my shoulders against the warm desert breeze sweeping across the terrace. I directed my gaze toward the three individuals secured behind the heavy braided cord. My parents and my younger sister were unrecognizable from the arrogant hosts who had occupied this space an hour earlier. They were entirely trapped inside a neon-illuminated cage under the unrelenting watch of corporate security. Richard was slumped against the teakwood platform, his breathing shallow and rapid. The custom velvet dinner jacket hung loosely on his deflated frame. He stared at the black leather folio resting on the glass as if it were an active explosive device. Valerie sat frozen on the plush sofa, clutching her unpaid diamond necklace. Her flawless makeup was ruined by streaks of mascara tracking down her pale cheeks. The grand illusion she spent decades cultivating had dissolved into public ruin. Tiffany remained huddled near the corner, weeping silently into her hands as her digital reputation burned to ash on the internet. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or demand an apology for the decades of financial abuse they had inflicted upon me. Demanding an apology requires a lingering desire for reconciliation. It implies that a fractured relationship can be repaired. I possessed zero desire to reconstruct the burnt bridge resting at my feet. The corporate audit was closed. The financial liability was permanently transferred. "Happy 30th birthday to me," I said softly. The words hung in the arid air, quiet, but carrying the undeniable force of absolute finality. I did not wait for a response. I did not grant them the satisfaction of a prolonged, dramatic farewell or a bitter argument. I simply turned my back on my bloodline and began walking toward the private elevators located at the far end of the pavilion. My departure initiated a profound shift in the atmosphere of the rooftop. The remaining high society guests who had lingered to witness the spectacular collapse of the William family immediately altered their posture. As I approached the dense crowd, they did not ignore me or dismiss me as the boring tech worker. They stepped aside. The sea of tailored suits and designer gowns parted seamlessly, creating a wide, unobstructed pathway for my exit. I heard the hushed murmurs of respect rippling through the elite onlookers. They recognized the sheer ruthless precision of the cryptographic trap I had executed. In a city built upon predatory power dynamics and high-stakes gambling, they understood that I was the most dangerous individual in the room. A prominent commercial real estate developer offered a slow, subtle nod of admiration as I passed his table. I walked through the corridor of wealthy socialites with my head held high, projecting the serene confidence of a woman who had just reclaimed her entire existence. I reached the polished steel doors of the private elevator. The call button glowed with a soft blue light. I pressed it, and the doors parted instantly. I stepped into the glass-enclosed capsule and turned to face the terrace one final time. As the heavy doors slid shut, the muted thumping of the lounge music was entirely severed. A hydraulic system engaged, lowering the capsule down the exterior of the Azure Tower. Through the transparent walls, I watched the glittering rooftops slowly shrink away. The lavish cabanas, the melting ice sculptures, and the frantic flashing lights of the venue security detail receded into the distance. The heavy, suffocating burden of being the expendable, flexible daughter remained up there on that teakwood platform, resting squarely beside the $18,450 invoice. I felt a physical lightness spread through my chest. The invisible chains of familial obligation dissolved into the Las Vegas night. 5 years ago, on my 25th birthday, I sat in a bleak diner and sacrificed my entire life savings to rescue my father from his own reckless gambling debt. I allowed them to drain my resources because I desperately wanted their approval. Tonight, on my 30th birthday, I orchestrated a flawless defensive maneuver that protected my assets and exposed their fraud to the world. The contrast between the frightened girl in the diner and the executive standing in the elevator was profound. I had established a permanent, unbreakable boundary. I would later learn through local news channels that the venue general manager executed his threat exactly 10 minutes after my departure. The Metropolitan Police arrived at the resort, placed my parents in handcuffs, and escorted them through the crowded casino floor for felony theft of services. Their fraudulent shell company was investigated, their heavily mortgaged suburban home was foreclosed upon, and their fragile country club status was eradicated. I did not dwell on their legal ruin. I focused entirely on the sanctuary of my own autonomy. I changed my contact numbers. I fortified my banking firewalls. I continued my lucrative career in risk management entirely unburdened by the parasitic demands of toxic relatives. I stepped into my 30s exactly as I was meant to exist, untouchable, independent, and completely free. If you are watching this video and you recognize your own life in my story, I need you to listen carefully. If you are trapped in a family dynamic that uses you as a financial utility, you must understand that you possess the power to alter the equation. You are not obligated to fund your own disrespect. You are not required to sacrifice your stability, your savings, or your sanity to maintain the fragile illusion of toxic people. Blood does not entitle anyone to drain your resources. Predators will always rely on your guilt to sustain their lifestyle. They will weaponize the concept of family unity to force you into submission. They will call you selfish when you finally refuse to hand over your hard-earned income. Let them call you selfish. Accept the label and walk away. You have the absolute right to set up impenetrable firewalls around your life. You can refuse the guilt trips. You can deny the unreasonable demands. You can stop keeping the peace for individuals who constantly wage war against your future. The moment you stop funding their vanity is the moment you reclaim your power. You can start speaking up for yourself today. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this audit. If my journey resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe and hit the notification bell. I share narratives just like this every single week, focusing on financial independence and the unyielding power of standing your ground. Drop a comment below and tell me what boundary this story inspired you to set in your own life. Until next time, remember to protect your assets and take care of yourself. You deserve it. The neon lights of the Azure Tower have long since dimmed in my memory, but the fractured echoes of that 31st birthday remain a profound teacher. When the velvet rope was unhooked and transformed into a barricade, it did not merely signify the end of a lavish party. It marked the collapse of an American illusion. Looking back at the wreckage of my family, the real tragedy was not the $18,000 they attempted to steal. The real tragedy was the hollow, transactional foundation upon which my parents built our home. In the aftermath of that night, I have spent countless hours dissecting the anatomy of a broken family, searching for the fundamental lessons hidden within the rubble of their Vegas vanity. In American culture, we are often sold a specific, glittering vision of success. We are taught that a traditional family structure is the ultimate bedrock of society, a sanctuary of unconditional love and mutual support. Yet a silent epidemic festers behind the manicured lawns and the country club memberships. It is the epidemic of performance. My parents, Richard and Valerie, fell victim to a warped interpretation of the American dream. They conflated provision with affection and social status with moral virtue. They forgot that the primary responsibility of a parent is not to curate an enviable aesthetic for the outside world, but to cultivate a deeply rooted, emotionally aware environment for their children. True family responsibility requires an unwavering commitment to honesty and fairness. These are not merely abstract concepts. They are the daily practices that shape a child's understanding of their own worth. Honesty in parenting extends far beyond telling the truth about where you went or what you spent. It requires authentic living. It demands that parents confront their own insecurities rather than projecting them onto their offspring. My parents lived a frantic, desperate lie. They wore leased designer clothing and drank vintage champagne they could not afford, forcing my sister and me to play assigned roles within their theatrical production. In their relentless pursuit of prestige, they abandoned fairness entirely. They split their children into distinct utilitarian categories. Tiffany, with her curated beauty and hunger for the spotlight, became their social accessory. They groomed her to believe her entire value rested in her image, shielding her from consequence and reality. I, possessing a quiet nature and a lucrative corporate career, was relegated to the role of the silent financier. They groomed me to believe my only worth was my capacity to fund their illusions. Both of us were deeply wronged, abused by a system that prioritized utility over humanity. They did not raise daughters. They cultivated assets. Emotional awareness is the oxygen a family needs to survive. Without it, the home becomes a suffocating vacuum. Emotional awareness means recognizing your child as an independent, sovereign individual with their own fears, dreams, and boundaries. It requires listening to the silence as much as the spoken words. For decades, my parents ignored my silence. They interpreted my quiet compliance as a bottomless reservoir of tolerance. They failed to understand that a child's silence is rarely empty. It is often a heavy, accumulating ledger of unaddressed pain. When parents lack the emotional intelligence to read that ledger, they inevitably push their children toward a catastrophic breaking point. Society places an immense, often suffocating burden on the concept of filial piety. We are conditioned to believe that blood is an unbreakable covenant. The conventional wisdom dictates that children owe their parents an eternal debt of gratitude, a debt paid through endless forgiveness and unwavering loyalty. We are told to respect our elders, to keep the peace, to absorb the slights and the betrayals, because they are still your family. But the events on that glittering rooftop forced me to embrace a profoundly different perspective. I learned that blind loyalty to a toxic system is not an act of love. It is an act of self-destruction. The most controversial yet vital lesson I extracted from the ashes of my family is this: sometimes the greatest act of responsibility a child can undertake is to walk away. When parents abdicate their fundamental duties of honesty, fairness, and emotional protection, they forfeit the right to demand unconditional allegiance. Breaking the cycle of generational trauma often requires an act of seeming ruthlessness. It requires looking at the people who gave you life and choosing to protect your own life instead. By refusing to sign that leather folio, by allowing the security guards to execute their corporate protocol, I was not acting out of a desire for petty revenge. I was establishing a boundary that my parents were fundamentally incapable of setting for themselves. True parenting, the kind that endures the trials of time and builds resilient generations, is rooted in the quiet, unglamorous work of character building. It is about holding your children accountable, yes, but it is equally about holding yourself accountable to them. It is the courage to say that we do not have the money for this, instead of stealing to maintain a facade. It is the strength to value a child's quiet intellect just as much as another child's radiant charm. If Richard and Valerie had embraced those traditional grounded values, we might have spent my 30th birthday sharing a modest meal in a quiet kitchen, wealthy in the only currency that actually matters: genuine connection. Instead, they chose the neon lights, and the neon lights burned them to the ground. Their tragedy serves as a stark, enduring warning for anyone navigating the complex waters of family dynamics. We must remain vigilant against the seductive pull of superficiality. We must fiercely guard our emotional and financial borders against those who would drain us dry, even if those people share our last name. If you find yourself resonating with the quiet struggles of the scapegoat, if you are exhausted from funding the illusions of the people around you, know that you are not alone in this fight. I invite you to subscribe and follow Morning Revenge, where we continue to explore the intricate, often painful dynamics of reclaiming your autonomy. Join a community that understands the heavy cost of setting boundaries and the beautiful, terrifying freedom that follows. The legacy of the Azor Tower is not a story of vengeance. It is a story of profound, agonizing emancipation. It forces us to examine the reflection in our own mirrors and ask difficult questions about the people we allow into our inner sanctums. The conventional world will tell you that a family is a permanent, immutable structure, a sanctuary you must defend at all costs. But perhaps the truth is far more demanding. Perhaps true family is not a birthright inherited through shared genetics, but a privilege earned through consistent, undeniable respect. And the most dangerous illusion of modern parenting is the belief that you can sacrifice a child's soul to buy the world's admiration and somehow still expect them to be there when the bill comes due.